So, here we go again. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to the wonderful Wednesday and to the launch of Lottie's latest book, a collection of poems called Building Up to Now. Can you believe it's just 8.5 months since we were sitting here, listening to Lottie's family reading from her last publication? And by my calculations, this is Lottie's 6th book in just 3 years. Flippin' heck, you can't even have babies that fast. You really can't have babies that fast, can you? And Lottie, if you're listening, and let's face it, she very rarely does, don't even think about trying. Seriously, though, that's quite an achievement. And if she carries on like this, she will surely surpass even Agatha Christie's total. She might even get that call from Buckingham Palace and be recognised for services to literature. Dame Lottie. It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? It also spoonerises rather well. Lame Dottie. Lame Dottie Cook. Clotty to her friends. And imagine the excitement in the street as people point and exclaim, "Look, Dame Clotty." Now, you may have bought a copy of the book already, but of course there's nothing to stop you buying another one on the way out. If you haven't bought one yet, the doors are, of course, locked. Lottie's very clever like that. Pay to get out. Won't be long until she appears on Dragon's Den. As a dragon, of course. Anyway, you're not here to listen to me. You're here for the beer. So you'll be glad to know that you will be very welcome at the bar during the interval, especially if you buy a drink. And that will be after the first half, which I'm told will last about 30 minutes. It won't, of course, because it never does. So those of you who have already bought a pint have done the right thing. And now, it's my privilege and gives me great pleasure to invite our bard to the stage to give you a taste of her latest publication. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and please give a very warm welcome to the remarkable Lottie Cook.
Hi everyone, it's so nice to see you here. Thank you very much for coming. Before I start talking more about where the idea came from the book, I thought it would be nice to open with the opening paragraph in the book, which I think gives a nice brief as to what the message behind it is. So, everything in the world started with something. Whether you believe in the Big Bang or a necessary being, everyone must agree that we started somewhere. And ever since the first people walked on Earth, however old they may be, life has been building up until this very moment. Billions of years, billions of people, and everyone has lived their own story. Billions of events, some minuscule and some world-changing, each of them sculpting how our world looks today. And today, whatever today is whilst you're reading this, there will be billions of events, and the trajectory of our lives will be changed. The earth moves and we can't do anything about it, so to learn about it is a privilege. What I can fit into these pages is only a fraction of humanity, a tiny fragment of how our life came to us. Everything has been building up to now. So it was 3 years ago last week that I published my first book, Killing Gwen Crawford, which some of you may have read. It was a crime novel which focused on a hit woman who got into a very sticky situation. And then I've always loved to write. When I was younger, I'd tell people I wanted to be an actress and an author. I let go of the dream of being an actress a while ago, but I kept with it with being an author. Only a few months later, I came out with my second book, Silence Speaks 100 Words. And then after that, I decided to revisit the first book I wrote at 13, which is called The Ring, and became the third book I published. Last June, then, I published a book called If Walls Could Talk, which was another sort of crime whodunit novel. And after that, I turned to poetry. I'd always liked reading poetry, but I never thought it would be something I could write. But I was at the Hay Festival last May, and I watched lots of different poetry events, in particular Holly McNish, who is an amazing poet, one of my biggest inspirations. If you get the chance, definitely read some of her work. She's so talented. And she really inspired me to put pen to paper. And then last summer, I started writing Everyone I've Never Met, which was my first poetry collection, and it was so much fun to write. Some of you were here for the release last November, which was, again, so fun. And straight after that, I knew I wanted to write another collection of poetry. But the thing is, I liked having a theme. I liked having a bit of a concept. Obviously, Everyone I've Never Met, I knew I was writing poems about people I'd never met. So then it was difficult thinking of a new concept. What did I want my next collection to be about? And then I found this quote somewhere by a poet called Ocean Vuong. And the quote is, "Whether we want to or not, we are travelling in a spiral." Now this quote, you can tell from the cover that Derry made, this is what inspired the book. It was sort of that idea of connecting the past to the present and drawing messages from past events and learning from them and sort of comparing them to how our life is now. I wanted to make this collection both about unrepresented events that I did not know and I thought that others might not know, to raise awareness of them, but also events that changed everyone's lives, that everyone is aware of, things like COVID-19 that we all are very, very familiar with. Originally, it was meant to be 101 poems, going from 1923 to 2024. But I finished this book in January, at the end of January, and I felt really inspired. It was at the time where the Palisades in Los Angeles were burning, and I was watching this on the news and then going outside in a big coat and a scarf and gloves and a hat, and everywhere was icy, and it was just really strange to see how different it was. And so I felt really inspired and write a poem about that, and that is the last one, and why it is 102 poems and not 101. Tonight there will be a few different people reading, a few members of my family, and as Mr. Dendy said, there will be a short 20-minute break in the middle. So I'm going to jump straight in because we have quite a few poems to get through. I'm going to start with my favourite from the collection. This poem is from 1952 and is about the night of the murdered poets. This refers to the execution of 13 Soviet Jewish intellectuals on August 12, 1952, in the Lubyanka prison in Moscow, under the regime of Joseph Stalin. The victims were mostly Yiddish writers, poets, and artists, including notable figures like Peretz Markish, David Bergelson, and Itzik Pfeffer. They were falsely charged with espionage, treason, and plotting to establish a Jewish republic in Crimea. I used a lot of epigraphs in this collection because I thought it was really cool to take quotes or extracts from poems to do with the events, because you're quite lucky here tonight. You're hearing these poems, but firstly hearing me talk a bit about them. Whereas if you're reading the book, you don't get that. Sometimes you're not going to know exactly what the event is, so I think that helps add a bit of depth to it. I chose to write this poem to represent 1952 because as a poet, I thought it was quite sad. And it was something I'd never heard of. So, as I said, I wanted to write about things I'd never heard of to sort of start a conversation about it, about these cases like this where people are falsely accused and executed for it. So, 1952, the night of the murdered poets. Under the sword I cried aloud, I am a Jew. Itzik Pfeffer. The lost voices once so clear, now trapped whispers, gripped by fear. Beneath the stars they gathered near, and met their end, unknown, austere. They penned their truth, defied the night. They never gave up the final fight. But ruthless hands stole their breath, and tore the page, unavoidable death. Under Stalin's fist, a charge of treason. There could never be another reason. But the words they wove were threads of light, but it turned dark. They lost their fight. The world failing to understand the beauty grown from a trembling hand. A verse, a line, a calculated rhyme could never escape the grip of time. The war of words was lost to guns. The ink was spilled. The deed was done. The murdered poets, are they gone? Or do their songs still linger on? So I don't think the next poem needs as much as an introduction. It's from 1940 and is about Churchill's "We will fight on the beaches" speech. It was given to the House of Commons during World War II, following the successful evacuation of British and Allied troops from Dunkirk. It acknowledges the evacuation at Dunkirk as a heroic effort, but not as a victory, warning that the war is far from over and greater battles may lie ahead. Also in it, he vows that Britain will never surrender, no matter what the enemy brings. The purpose of the speech was to prepare the British people for continued struggle and show unwavering determination to resist Nazi Germany at all cost. I chose to write about this because I think that it was a very important moment during the war for what it represented, the idea that Britain were not going to give up. From both a historical point of view and also a linguistical point of view, it is a great speech that I think is often spoken about. So Nanny's going to read this one for you.
Thank you. 1940, Churchill's speech. We shall fight in France. And they did as they tore through earth, Europe's heart trembling, breaking, becoming old. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. And they did, with battleships larger than lives, bravery sinking deep into nothing. We shall defend our island. And they did, with armoured souls, with shields of hope. We shall fight on the beaches. And they did, upon the edge of history's shore, where tides of blood collected on the sand. We shall fight on the landing grounds. And they did, beneath steel that sung a savage sound, beneath cracking wings. We shall fight in the fields. And they did, with flashbacks to a peaceful life, familiarity of the dead daisies trampled on. We shall go on to the end, his voice echoes. Scared, they listen. They fought for us, giving their tomorrow for our today.
So, Junko Tabei was a mountaineer from Japan and became the first woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest on May 16, 1975. The title of the next poem is The 36th Person to Climb Everest. Originally, it was meant to be the first woman to climb Everest because that's what it's about. But when researching, I discovered that she doesn't like to be called that. She likes to be known as the 36th person to climb Everest. So I thought that I would honour that in the title. She led an all-female Japanese expedition and overcame challenges such as an avalanche that temporarily buried her team. She was the only one of her group to reach the summit despite harsh weather conditions and physical exhaustion. She later became the first woman to climb the 7 summits. She is often celebrated not only for her climbing achievements, but also for breaking gender barriers in mountaineering and inspiring women around the world. I decided to write this poem because I think that she is a truly remarkable woman, and I'd never heard about her story, so it only made me more passionate to share it. I think that anyone who climbs Everest is an inspiration, but to be the first woman to do it and break that stereotype is outstanding. So I'll just find it. 1975, the 36th person to climb Everest. She had intrepid blood and cherry blossoms sprouting underneath each step of her small feet. And the mountain started to look like the lips of the man that she loves, the slope like his spindly fingers that she wishes to place a ring on one day. She married the mountains, finding solace in its silence, the pulse of the terror. She walked through the shadows, fingers grazing rock faces as if she prayed. The mountain never spoke back, never whispered a sound, but in love she fell with a tranquility. A sisterhood of stories, climbing history's marathon together. The sprint to be the first, the road not taken by a woman, Junko Tabei thrown forward as Earth Power held back her team. Alone, she rose to the challenge. Alone, she rose to the top. The year 2000 bug is something that I'm sure most of you in the audience are familiar with. It was a computer flaw that stemmed from the way that dates were programmed in many systems. To save memory, programmers in the 20th century often used 2 digits to represent the year. As a result, when the year changed to 2000, many systems read 00 as 1900 instead of 2000. This potentially would cause errors in date calculations, financial records, and system operations. There were widespread fears that this would lead to major failures in banking, utilities, transportation, and other critical systems. However, thanks to global extensive efforts to fix and replace the affected software and hardware, major disruptions were largely avoided. I decided to write this poem because I found it to be a very interesting and early demonstration on how modern life depends on computer systems. What made me laugh, really, was that they were finding problems in unexpected places like lifts, which you wouldn't really expect. So, there we go. 1999, the year 2000 bug. As for the turn of the century, when clocks ticked near, a silent dread bloomed, shrouded in fear. Not of war or famine, not of storm or quake, but a glitch in the code that the world would wake. The world had gone digital, systems entwined, a net of data with threads redefined. Yet in the heart of this technical sprawl, a simple mistake threatened to unravel it all. A 2-digit year, 99, it read. So what would happen when 00 spread? Would the clock stop or the numbers collide? Would the future be lost, the present deride? A cascade of errors, the dominoes falling, a world unprepared, though many were calling. Will the planes fall from the sky, the trains cease to run? Will the history book burn, the story be undone? Midnight struck, the world held its breath. Would we encounter a digital death? But when the dawn rose, the earth still spun. The bug had been quelled, and fewer glitches begun. Yet somewhere beneath the world's bright light, a whisper of caution still flits through the night. For the year 2000 bug was seen to be tame. It was but a warning in a digital game. John Lennon and Paul McCartney first met on July 6, 1957, at a church fair in Liverpool. Lennon was performing with his band The Quarrymen when a friend introduced him to McCartney after their show. McCartney impressed Lennon by playing guitar and singing songs such as Eddie Cochran's 20 Flight Rock. Shortly after, Lennon invited McCartney to join his band, The Quarrymen. This meeting marked the beginning of one of the most legendary songwriting partnerships in music history, eventually leading to, of course, the formation of the Beatles. I wrote this poem as not only am I a big fan of the Beatles, I think that they are one of the most culturally significant bands and have inspired so many other songs and bands. And so Dabby is going to read this one.
1957. Behind the altar and the baptismal font, Lennon's voice wailing like the church bell's song. The live bird perched on the side of the lorry as the instrumental boys are held like puppets. An old school friend of bass player scaled by, Lennon met McCartney and fate was made. The stars aligned as soon they would become John, the dreamer with a poet's desire, Paul with melodies that would never tire. They crossed like currents in the same tide. They sang like blackbirds on a telephone wire. They created the song, the beat, the charm. They started a journey that would never be finished.
So this next poem is from 2023 and covers a topic which is still an ongoing issue, Israel's war on Gaza. When writing this poem, and I guess all of the more recent poems, it was quite difficult because not only do they deal with difficult topics, it's difficult to write because of how fresh it is. You know, trying to balance that sensitivity of an ongoing event whilst also giving a clear presentation of it like the other poems in the collection. Now, as I said, this poem from 2023, but I think that most of you will know it's not in 2023 that this ordeal started. The conflict between Israel and Palestine has been happening for decades, but this poem really reflects on the events following October 7th, where Hamas militants launched a large-scale attack on southern Israel, killing approximately 1,200 people and taking around 250 hostages, which then led to Israel declaring war, mobilizing hundreds of thousands of reservists and beginning intensive airstrikes into Gaza on October 8th, followed by a total siege, cutting of food, water, electricity, and fuel. I've just realised I've missed a poem, haven't I? Yeah, but it's fine. The reason that I was going to explain to you about this poem was to reflect that war is not over, because the poem you were meant to have just heard was from 100 years before, 1923, and was about post-war World War I. And so I thought it was interesting that these poems 100 years apart are still dealing with the same topic. And, you know, war is something that is changing our world. It always is, and it always has. And it's something that as long as it keeps happening, we should still keep talking about. So, "2023, Israel's war on Gaza. In Gaza's streets the children played, before the land became infertile. The olive trees now blackened limbs beneath the heavens. Hatred spills from side to side, like oil across a tiled floor. Can you hear the mother's cry? 1,000 lives that cannot sleep. The laughter had left like a bus that came too early. The land calls for peace. The people want, need a ceasefire. Israel's promise built on blood and pain, but in their name the children fade. The soldiers marching through the streets. Whose land really is this? That's the question that started it all. Whose tears can fix the cracked pavements? War breeds only hollow eyes, and for each victory, 1,000 lie dead. No triumph should come when a child falls. When will we achieve the peace that men desire? Why bury sons and lose our brothers? I can write 1,000 poems about war, and you can read them all, but that's not even the surface of conflict, and this isn't even the end. There we go, I found it. So the poem you were meant to have just heard is from 1923, as I said, and it's about the Young Bright Things, who were a group of wealthy, stylish and bohemian young people in 1920s Britain. They were known for their extravagant lifestyles and wild parties. They emerged in a post-World War I Britain as a reaction to the trauma of the war, often coming from aristocratic or upper-class backgrounds. They were famous for their lavish parties, pranks, and being heavily featured in the media. They symbolised the carefree, rebellious spirit of the Roaring Twenties, and that's what I found most interesting, is how they highlighted something quite different to what I think we tend to think about war. And sometimes I think it's nice to think about positive things that came out of horrific events, as weird as that sounds. So Auntie Gemma's going to read this one.
"1923, The Young Bright Things. England's lost generation, sinking deep into the land their elders fell into, after the bombs and machine guns ripped away childhood out of bruised palms. Pulled up from the comfortable trenches by a bright light, young aristocrats dressed in flamboyancy, searching for the humour in the big city, with liquid gold pouring down their throats and unknown illegalities running through their bloodstream. The original party animals, rising from the black clouds into the flashing lights. Like a cult, recovering the lost generation. Carpe diem for their lost brothers and sisters."
In the 1950s, the American South was governed by Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation in all public spaces, including schools, restaurants, and public transportations. On buses, black passengers had to sit in the back and were often required to give up their seats to white passengers, even if they were already seated. On December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus. Parks was arrested for violating segregation laws, but her act of resistance sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, which was led by Martin Luther King Jr. The boycott lasted over a year and led to a Supreme Court ruling that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. This then became a catalyst for the civil rights movement, which is why I decided to write about it, as it is a clear display of the domino effects in history that this book tries to prove. So, Nanny, if you want to come up.
1955, Rosa Parks stands to sit. She was a quiet volcano waiting to erupt, waiting for the beg of a man to allow her to resist. Her hands, though small, had touched the past, felt the life of her ancestors. Worn by struggle, her mind was afire. She was not going to give up her throne. The bus rolled on with wheels like carved stone, slowly becoming a vessel, a symbol of the end, the reaching of a discoloured hand, a change for all. Her quiet defiance, her fearless wave, 1,000 great leaders holding her up to keep her sitting as the world stood in admiration.
So we've got one more poem now before the interval, and this is about a quote said by Steve Jobs, who at the time was the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Apple. It's from a commencement speech he made at Stanford University on June 12, 2005. I landed on this to represent 2005 because the quote itself really stuck out to me. I thought it was a really important lesson that we should all live by, and I wanted to bring attention to its importance. But also, I wanted to reflect how the different types of things in history can influence us. You know, this book contains events, films, births, deaths, and even quotes that can show everything has an impact on us. And so the quote is, "Our time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." 2005, Steve Jobs says, "To walk this earth is to untangle our threads, the woven threads where others have walked. Create the spider web of your life, connect the dots that you decide. Though the crowd may chant in unison, the song of life is yours, and yours alone. 100 voices will tell you where to stand, to measure your worth by lines and letters. Yet in your chest there is a deeper pulse arising. The world, a mirror, tries to shape your face, but you are a sculptor carving out your story. No judges, no rules, no maps to guide your hand. The canvas waits, untouched by contrite plans. Some say to follow the road that others created, to find success and build a life that's brave. But bravery shouldn't be measured by the gold, nor by the coins that cling to your pockets. To live is not to merely mimic false dreams, but to create new worlds, your own destiny. It is to wander freely where no footsteps lie, and let the unknown teach you. The winds may try and tear you down, but the soul that stands apart from the crowd will never burn. Unfold the wings that you've kept locked inside. Live not by the path that others drew. Choose your path with courage in your stride. In every choice, every step you take, you write the story that only you can make. And when the final dusk begins to fall, you will see that living was the greatest call." Thank you. I'll see you back in 20 minutes. Thank you. Hello? Hello. Welcome back. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all for coming back. I hope you're all ready for another half hour of poetry. We've got quite a few poems to get through, so I'm going to waste no time and jump straight into the next poem, which reflects on 2008, which is a very special year, because it was the year I was born. When I told lots of friends and family about this concept I had, there was a lot of people asked if I could write a poem about the year they were born, like about them, which I would have loved to do, and it would have been a lovely idea, but it really would have been just the opposite of my last book, and it would have turned into everyone I have met. So instead, I decided that I would write 2008 for my birth as something that everyone can relate to, as obviously everyone was born. So, yeah, 2008, my birth. I didn't have a name. I didn't own a voice. I asked the stars what this was. They said existence. The earth did not tremble, nor did it sing. I came in peacefully through the revolving doors. I had not yet seen the burden of life, the world engulfed in flames. I hadn't seen the tranquil mountains, the sun rising on a fresh morning. I'd never come face to face with the devil, never shook hands with death. I had not yet sculpted my path. I'd never seen a painting in progress. I hadn't seen the hunger on the streets, hadn't felt the plastic in the ocean. I hadn't watched the moon in its phases, never knew the power of a book. But I'd seen the helping hands of midwives and my family coming together. I'd heard the words, "I love you," before I was even real. So, for some of the years, as I briefly touched on earlier, I wrote about films that were released. And this was the case for 1939, where I wrote about the film The Wizard of Oz being released. I decided to write about this because I wanted to include poems about films, about their stories and what we can learn from them, because I think it's important to look at films, whether it be from the 1930s like this one, or sooner, I know 2006 is about High School Musical. So other films that we can learn from, whether you think it when you first watch it or not, it's like a book. Sometimes you have to read between the lines. And I think a film like The Wizard of Oz is very important because The Wizard of Oz, of course, inspired many spin-offs, Wicked being probably the most popular. But I'm sure many of you are already acquainted with the story, but if not, it follows the story of Dorothy, who is swept away by a tornado to the magical land of Oz. To return home, she has to follow the yellow brick road, but on her way, she meets a Tin Man who wants a heart, a Scarecrow who wants a brain, and a Cowardly Lion who wants courage. They all hope that the Wizard of Oz can grant their wishes. However, they must also face the Wicked Witch of the West, who wants Dorothy's magical ruby slippers. And quite fitting, Ruby is going to read this poem.
From Kansas, dust rose a young girl, with naked feet, cold and lonely. Ruby slippers from dead toes now guide her down the yellow brick road to the emerald town. And the wicked dress in pink, walking across the air like the light that beams in the night. Her powers does not roar nor rage. It hums and whispers, soft as sage. And the man with no flesh, no soul or brain, a life bound together by hay and wire. The opinion that intelligence defends you, known by all to not be true. A finger crossed paths with rusted feet. His limbs are hollow, no blood, no pulse. Not hear her heart beating beneath the surface. A creaking joint, a squeak sigh. He moves beneath the broken sky. She hears a roar of a lion so cowardly, defying the stereotypes of a man so brave. Once king of beasts with a golden crown, in his own fear he will drown. Finally, the wicked witch, skin as green as poison apples, eventually melting like the ice on a mountain, and as the monkey with wings are now free.
So, on the 22nd of April every year, we celebrate Earth Day to raise awareness and support for environmental protection. The day focuses on issues like climate change, pollution, deforestation, and conservation of natural resources. People usually participate in activities such as cleanups, tree planting, educational events to promote sustainability and care for the planet. The first ever Earth Day occurred in 1970. A major trigger was a massive oil spill in Santa Barbara, California in 1969, which caused widespread environmental damage and also got a lot of media attention. Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin was moved by this disaster and also by the energy of the Vietnam War protests led mainly by students. He realised if the same passion could be directed towards environmental issues, it could spark real change. I decided to write about this because Earth Day is something that I think I hear about every year. And I think it's important for us to think about the environment and these issues every day, not just on the 22nd of April. So, I'm going to find it again. "1970, the first Earth Day. They witnessed the spill of oil. They listened as the birdsong faded, dawn chorus of blackened tar. An elegy to the ocean's wound, blackened veins with bleeding crude oil, the pelicans falling with shattered wings. They made the decision. This is not our world. We had become an alien nation, a place where responsibility was juggled, never quite grasping the surface. With hands of amethyst, they took back what is ours. Now a new story of Earth was being written, one of peace, one of unity, one of reclamation. In April's eye there was a hopeful gleam. The change would fight until death do us part." The Equal Franchise Act of 1928 was the law passed in the United Kingdom that granted equal voting rights to both women and men. It allowed all women aged 21 and over to vote in parliamentary elections, regardless of their social status, income, or property ownership. This act finally brought women's voting rights in line with men's, who had been able to vote from age of 21 without restrictions since 10 years prior, 1918. Previously, under the Representation of the People Act 1918, only women over 30 who met certain property qualifications were allowed to vote. The Act was a major step forward, but it still excluded many younger and working class women. The Equal Franchise Act was the result of continued pressure from women rights activists and organisations who had fought for decades for full political equality. It was passed with widespread support in Parliament, reflecting changing attitudes in British society following World War I, when women had taken on many roles traditionally held by men. I decided to write this poem because knowing that the passage of this act gave an additional 5 million women the right to vote is phenomenal. This event highlights the bravery of women who fought for the vote through protests, arrests, and years of activism. So Auntie Gemma's going to read this one.
"1928, Equal Franchise Act. For years they drew themselves in front of carriages, sacrificing their hearts for our voices, and their fight ended with unfair equality, as age defined your ability. But it was something better than nothing. A man could change the world, place a mark in a box, use their voice to scream the tune of change. A woman of his age could only sit and watch. But time changes the rules, and a voice box was placed in the mouths of millions of young women, as it became clear that a woman could write history with nothing but a pencil.
In 1960, national service in the United Kingdom was officially abolished, with the final group of conscripted men completing their service by 1963. The system had required all able-bodied men aged 18 to 26 to serve in the armed forces for a specific period. Initially, it was 18 months, but it later extended to 2 years. National service was introduced during World War II to meet the demands of the war effort, but continued afterward due to Cold War tensions, Britain's commitments to overseas conflict, and the need to maintain a large military presence. However, by the late 1950s, the political and military landscape was changing. The threat of global war had decreased, Britain's empire was shrinking, and the government began transitioning to a smaller, more professional volunteer military force. In 1957, the British government announced that national service would be phased out, and legislation followed in 1960 to end conscription for good. I wrote this poem because I think that this event was a huge turning point in British history. When researching and reading about these young men whose education, careers and personal freedom were ruined due to this legislation, it was really sad, especially when remembering that this still happens in places across the world. So Ruby's reading this one again.
When they were young, they dreamt of a family. They wanted to turn 20 and get married, put a ring on a pretty girl's finger, carry their baby off to bed, receive a letter in the post to encourage them on their success. They're still young and all the family they have is dying. They turn 20 and receive a gun wound, take the hat off the fallen soldiers, carry their friends to the overflowing graveside. After they receive a letter in the post, ordering them to war, ripping away youth. But this was the end of the letters, the letterbox glued shut. The man still fought, still dreamt of the life they would have. But this country, the owl stopped delivering.
The Doomsday Clock is a symbolic clock created in 1947 by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist to represent how close humanity is to global catastrophe, especially with factors like nuclear war, climate change, and other similar threats. The closer the clock is to midnight, the closer the world is to disaster. Scientists and experts adjust the time each year based on global events and risks. They say that the clock is not a prediction, but more of a warning to raise awareness about urgent global dangers and the need for action. When it was created in 1947, the clock was set at 7 minutes to midnight during the start of the nuclear age. The clock moved forward to midnight during times of heightened nuclear tension, such as the Cold War, nuclear tests, and conflicts like the Cuban Missile Crisis. It has also moved further away from midnight when progress was made in arms control or international cooperation. I wrote this because currently the clock is at 89 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been. And I think that I didn't know this before researching, which is crazy. Factors that have affected this are like the war in Ukraine, in Gaza, the continued threat of nuclear weapons, and the misuse of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. Not to alarm you guys or anything, as I said, it is a metaphor. It's not actually real, it's more of a warning. But I hope that this poem can raise some awareness. So, Dabby, if you want to come up.
(1947) Doomsday Clock inauguration. There were nuclear weapons in the hands of the public. There were unfinished wars, fumes in the lungs. There was a threat to humanity. A warning was sent out. 7 minutes until the clock strikes 12. 7 minutes until our hands lead the world to Armageddon. 7 minutes until it was too late. A metaphor, of course. The world was not to end in 7 minutes, the perspective lasting years. The clock changed as the years went by, flicking back and forth, closer to the end of the ball. There are still weapons in hands. There are wars in every corner of the world. There is pollution in the air, in the sea, in the land. They were scared in 1947. We are not scared no more, as we only have 89 seconds left. The end is near.
The Bethnal Green tube disaster occurred on the evening of March 3rd, 1943 in London during World War II. At the time, many London underground stations, including Bethnal Green, were being used as air raid shelters to protect civilians from German bombing raids. On this night in particular, a large crowd of people, mostly women, children and elderly residents, were trying to enter the station to take shelter from an unexpected air raid. As people hurried down the staircase leading into the station, a woman stumbled and fell, which caused a domino effect. In the dimly lit narrow stairway, panic spread quickly, and the crowd became trapped in a deadly crush. The tragedy resulted in the deaths of 173 people, making it one of the deadliest civilian incidents in the UK during the war. Many of the victims were mothers and children, heightening the tragedy's emotional impact. And I should also say that there was not an air raid. It was a false alarm, so it was all for nothing, basically. And initially, the British government kept details of the disaster a secret to avoid damaging public image during the war. It was not widely discussed until years later when survivors and their families began to speak out. And this is why I decided to write about it, to tell their story that was kept a secret for so long, because that is one of the main reasons I wrote this book, to share people's story throughout history who haven't had the chance. So Auntie Gemma, if you want to come up again.
1943, Bethnal Green tube disaster. London is being pounded. The bombs won't stop. No mercy within its compound. No freedom left beneath. Much unfinished business. Bethnal Green was not a station. With tracks not yet laid, it became a shelter. The light at the end of the tunnel. A comfort from the elements. It became a hotel for stragglers. Berlin was bombed a few days before, the calendar of history looking bleak, caution in every step as uncertain, with the sound of the siren now blaring. Escape was made to the shelter. Dashing out the buses, they wanted freedom. A mother carrying her child like an elephant in a fair. The man trips on top of her, and others follow, joining the deadly heap. A blackout of flight, people still racing for safety, unbeknown of the sea of struggle laying in their way. The wail from the bombs sounding, time was up. It was new and frightful. Everyone pushed, rattling the victims beneath, pinning down their souls, their bones have no room to dance, exhaling the breaths of bystanders. The bomb never dropped on Bethnal Green. One short mistake, a misplacement of feet, the ignorance of sight took away 173 lives.
We've only got 2 poems left. It's going quite quickly. So, as I said, this was the second to last poem of the night, which deals with quite a heavy topic. The case of Giselle Pellico is a case I'm sure many of you are familiar with, as it's become one of the most shocking sexual abuse cases globally. For those of you who haven't heard about her incredible story of bravery, between 2011 and 2020, her husband drugged her without her knowledge and allowed dozens of men to rape her while she was unconscious. He filmed and photographed dozens of these assaults, many of which were later discovered by police when he was arrested for an unrelated voyeurism in 2020. This revealed over 200 documented instances involving around 72 different men. Some of those men have still not been identified. In September 2024, a trial began in France involving Giselle's husband and 50 other men accused of rape, attempted rape, and sexual assault. Giselle, who was 72 at the time, insisted that the trial be public. She wanted to shift the shame onto the men, the perpetrators, rather than have the shame be put on herself, and to raise awareness about drug-facilitated sexual assault. On December 19th, 2024, all 51 defendants were convicted. Her now ex-husband received the maximum 20-year prison sentence. The others were sentenced between 3 and 15 years. The total prison time given to the group exceeded 400 years collectively. I was fortunate enough to watch a talk and then meet Giselle's daughter, Caroline, a few months ago in the Hay Festival. The talk was so emotional, but also really empowering, and really helped me write this poem in a way that I felt was right. Although topics like this are difficult to talk about and write about, I think it's so important that we do have these conversations to raise awareness of things such as chemical submission and the horrors faced by not only Giselle, but women across the world. This poem is one of the longer ones of the collection, but there is a reason for it that I'd like to point out. This poem is 51 lines to reflect the 51 men who were convicted for the horrors that she faced. So, Nani.
2024, Giselle Pellico's bravery. Her groom became a stranger, only a buried ring keeps them in common. The veil has been lifted, masquerade completed. A love built in the light and now collapsed in the sun. Giselle Pellico's courage was forged from the fire, a spark in the dark, no matter the cost. Where others might have bent like saplings in the rain, she rose like the mountains. She stood tall, pushed away the shame, the stigma that she should be embarrassed of another man's actions. She was unaware, masked and scared, but she would never be fearful. She paved the way for women like her, the past of hidden closets, the future of speaking truth. Each step forward marked the dust. Her voice became a clarion cry. Through the roar of the fire, she caught the flames. Not for glory, nor for fame, for those who had fallen, slipped through society's cracks. She turned the fire from something that consumes into a beacon of light that could banish the darkness. She ran where no woman had ever ventured before. She opened the gate for a race to follow, like a wolf leading a dangerously peaceful pack. Her voice became an echo of decades of mortification. She stood like the remaining mountain in the wind, unmoved by the wind, unmoved by the foreign bodies upon her. As people walked all over her, unknown liquid through her blood, the hikers must stop. Once caught in the fury, the warrior of women, our guiding light, the hero without a cape, the unsung anthem. Now this retelling may seem long, but her story, her fight was longer. The blindness of her pain, her lived nightmare, and the fight will not stop, will not come to an end until men learn to listen.
Before I read the final poem of the night, I'd just like to say some thank yous. So this book would truly not have been possible without my family and friends who support me in everything I do and has shaped me as a person. My family, my mum, my dad, my grandparents, my brother, Dan, Grace, Emil, my aunties, uncles, cousins, all of you. My friends who are always showing me their support, Caddy, Alice, Nancy, Fionn, Julian, Callum, Ella, Mia, Fionn Jones for fantastically illustrating the poems and bringing them even closer to life. She is so talented, and if you buy the book, which hopefully you will do, you will see her amazing illustrations. Derry for designing the cover, which perfectly encapsulates the quote that inspired this collection from Ocean Vuong. I also missed out the line that actually thanked Derry as a person for his support. Sorry. But yeah, thank you to Derry for his support despite not reading my books. For those who have inspired me in many ways, my favourite poets, Sylvia Plath and Holly McNish, for showing me what great poetry is and for inspiring me to put pen to paper. And of course, to those whose stories are written within these pages, I hope that they rest knowing that they've left a legacy that we can all learn from. This collection would not exist without the many voices, both past and present, that have whispered, roared, and lingered through the corridors of time. To history's poets, rebels, heroes, villains, and witnesses, thank you for leaving the echoes that compelled me to listen, question, and write. Thank you, Nani, Auntie Gemma, Dabby, and Ruby for being brave enough to read out my words tonight. And Mr. Dendy for that amazing, very hilarious introduction. Julian and Mike for saving us with the sound. And also Julian for filming the event. It will be hopefully available on YouTube soon, so you can all watch it back. And lastly, thank you to all of you who showed up tonight and listened to my poetry. It really means so much to see you all supporting me in my writing. I really can't thank you enough, and I really hope you've all enjoyed the night and enjoyed what you've heard. And now, the final poem of the night, another quite recent one. On April 15th, 2019, a devastating fire broke out at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, severely damaging one of the world's most famous landmarks. The fire, believed to have started accidentally during renovation work, quickly spread through the wooden roof structure, causing the collapse of the cathedral's iconic spire and much of its roof. Despite the extensive damage, firefighters managed to save the main stone structure, including the 2 bell towers, as well as many priceless religious relics and artworks, such as the Crown of Thorns. The blaze lasted nearly 15 hours and prompted an outpouring of grief and support from around the world. French President at the time, Emmanuel Macron, pledged to restore the cathedral, and an international fundraising effort was launched. Restoration efforts began shortly after the fire, and it reopened at the end of last year. Although it has reopened and is still a very beautiful building, it is not the same as it was before, and it never will be. Although it is rebuilt to look the same, it can't be identical because many of the original materials and craftsmanships were lost, so they've had to use more modern techniques and materials, and obviously modern safety upgrades have had to be added. I wrote this poem because this event made me reflect on how many things in history have been lost, like this, whether it may be a fire like this, or a flood, or maybe something as simple as a historical artifact being misplaced. Luckily, they were able to restore Notre Dame to be visually very similar, but unfortunately, that isn't the case for everything in history. Sorry, I've gone to the wrong page. Here we go. 2019, Notre Dame burns. History dies, that's a fact, truthful as a mirror. The structure was weak, brittle as bones of Roman emperors. It's like Alexandria all over again. How much of history has burnt? Which artifacts have drowned, suffocated under the sea? The scrolls that cradled the truth are now torn. The ladies who watched it unfold have returned to the soil. The ink that bled upon pages has faded like ghosts in a church. In crumbling halls, the carvings fade. A broken ark, a worn-down name. Notre Dame fell next, history torn by God's cruel palms, the spires that once reached for the heaven's hand. O Notre Dame, thou art no more, the flames, grand serpents twisted high, irreplaceable wreckage. Again, thank you very much. I know many of you have already bought a copy, but I think are there still some copies? There are still some copies if you haven't already got one or pre-ordered. I'll be sat over there and happy to sign your copies. So, thank you. Thank you.